Hopefully, a very interesting class for everyone. Maybe some things you know, some things you learn. We're going to talk about Hanukkah. And the title of today's class, the topic of today's class was
The heroes and victims of
the real victims and the real heroes of Hanukkah. We all know the general story of Hanukkah, how the Jews fought back, the Maccabees fought back against the Hellenistic Greeks, and they defeated them. Although we were just a small number of Maccabees against a big army, massive army, and they needed to find oil. God made a miracle, and the oil lasted for 8 days and nights, and we celebrate Hanukkah, and that's Hanukkah in a nutshell. So here's the question. The question is as follows. Mitzvahs are divided into two groups. All mitzvahs are divided into two groups. There's what we call the positive mitzvahs, the do's, and the negative mitzvahs, the don'ts. Okay, pretty simple. Now, within the category of the do's, things that we are obligated to do, the activities that we are instructed to actually do, they are broken down into also two parts. One is mitzvahs that women are obligated in, and one is mitzvahs that women are not obligated to do. Men are obligated in all mitzvahs. Women are not obligated in all mitzvahs. Which mitzvahs are they obligated in? Which mitzvahs are they not obligated in? The general rule is any mitzvah which is time bound is something that women are exempt from.
what, like what?
Well, to give you an example, any mitzvah which is not time bound, that's a mitzvah that women are obligated in. What's a mitzvah which is time bound? The mitzvah of tefillin. Tefillin can only be put on during the daytime, which means the mitzvah that's specifically for the daytime, there's a specific time of day it's supposed to be done. So women are exempt from the mitzvah. For example, the commandment to eat in a sukkah is a specific date. It's time bound. It's on this date you are to eat in a sukkah. Again, women are exempt from eating in a sukkah. What's an example of a mitzvah that women are obligated to do? For example, making the grace after meal, saying the blessing after you eat. When are you supposed to eat? Whenever you choose when you want to eat. You choose when you want to eat, and when you've finished eating, you say thanks to Hashem for the food. That's not time bound. There's no time obligation of when you're eating and when you're not eating. Honoring your parents all the time. Not time sensitive. So anything which is time sensitive, women are exempt from performing that mitzvah. That's the general rule.
Is that because they in charge of the household? And
We'll get to it in a second.
Not prohibited, you're saying, but exempt or.
Exempt. I'm using the word exempt. It's optional. Correct. It's optional. It's optional.
What about lighting candles?
Which candles?
Shabbos candles.
Shabbos candles, the mitzvah specifically given that they're supposed to do on Friday afternoon. Correct. But that's yes. So the answer is yes. That's on the contrary, that's specifically given to them. They're the ones that are charged with doing that mitzvah more than the men, as we discussed a few weeks ago.
But that's time bound, right?
Correct. Well, there's exemption. They give you the general rule. Now, here's the question. Hanukkah menorah. Are women obligated to light the Hanukkah candles or not? So the Gemara says that women are obligated in the mitzvah of lighting a Hanukkah menorah. Why are women obligated to light the Hanukkah menorah? Because Sha'af hein hoyu bo'isei hanes. Because they were also part of the miracle. Okay. And we find this idea also when it comes to drinking 4 cups of wine on Passover at the Seder. Women are also obligated to drink 4 cups of wine because Afhein Oyu Boisanes, they're also part of the miracle.
what?
This is a miracle. This is a activity that we're doing to commemorate a miracle that happened to who? That happened to everyone, women included. Hearing the Megillah, likewise, the same thing. Shabbos is another type of an exception. Why? Because we have Shabbos, 2 parts of the day. They're the do's and the don'ts. Zohar to remember Shabbos and Shomer to guard the Shabbos. And we learn in the Talmud, everyone who's obligated in the prohibitions of Shabbos are also obligated in the requirements of Shabbos. So therefore, Shabbos candles is part of the requirements of Shabbos. So anyone who is obligated in the things you're not allowed to do on Shabbos is also obligated in the things that you are supposed to do for Shabbos. So that's part of that. But the general rule is that you're exempt, if you're a woman, from these mitzvahs. But there's a few exceptions to the rule. Like all rules have a few exceptions. So if someone were to ask you on Chanukah, is there a mitzvah for women to light Chanukah menorah, the candles on Chanukah? The answer is 100%. Yes, 1,000%. What does this mean that the women were part of the miracle? Passover, we understand what it means women were part of the miracle. We know the story of we were all slaves in Egypt. We understand that a little bit better. But what exactly happened on Chanukah that the women were part of the miracle of Chanukah? The fact that the oil lasted for 8 days, how did that affect the women? How did that affect the men? It wasn't a miracle that happened to women. That oil happened to burn for 8 days didn't happen to anybody. It happened to oil. And now it's time sensitive, it's time bound, so women should seemingly be exempt, but they were part of the miracle. So what exactly happened over here? So in order to understand that, we have to get into actually the decrees of Chanukah. And when we get into the decrees of Chanukah, we're going to discover today that the real victims of the horrors that led up to Chanukah were the women, not the men. It was the women who were the real victims of Chanukah and the women who were the real heroes or heroines of Chanukah as well. So it's not just that they were part of the miracle of Chanukah, we're going to learn, but actually they were the miracle of Chanukah. The miracle was all about the women. So let's begin from the Talmud. The Talmud, it says like this. The Omer Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said, Noshim chayavos b'ner Chanukah. Women are obligated to light the Chanukah candles because they were also part of the miracle. It says Rashi, what does it mean they were part of the miracle? So I read it in English, it's translation, it's not exact translation, but it's pretty close to the exact. Since the Greeks decreed upon all the women getting married that they must first cohabitate with the Greek officer, in addition, the miracle happened through a woman. So now Rashi gives us the beginning, the opening, to what was the problem Chanukah and how the problem was resolved. One of the big issues leading up to Chanukah was specifically targeting women. This was every single virgin girl who was about to get married. She was kidnapped. She was taken by the general, the Greek general, and she would have to sleep with this general for the night before she would be able to get married. This is mandatory kidnap and rape. That's on the bad side of it. And on the good side of it, the miracle came about through a woman also, which we'll see later what exactly that means. Let's get a little bit deeper over here into the medrash and the decrees of Chanukah, the problem, the issues of Chanukah. Tanu Rabbanan, our rabbis taught as follows. B'mei Machlos Yavan Arishah Gozra al Yisrael. In the times of the wicked Greek Empire, they decreed upon the Jewish people as follows. Number one, anyone who has a bolt in his house should engrave on it that the Jewish people don't have a share in the God of Israel. In other words, you have to put on your inside your house on a very clear and public way. You have to disavow any type of connection to the God of Israel. So what did the Jewish people do? They immediately went and they uprooted all the bolts in their homes. So he said, you want us to do this? We don't have bolts. We can't do it. Okay. So what did they do next? They further decreed. Everyone who owns an ox, that was like your car. Anyone who had a car, right? If you owned an ox, you had to write on the horns of your ox that the Jewish people have no part in the God of Israel. So what did the Jewish people do? Immediately they went and they sold all their oxen. Okay. Number 3, they further decreed that the men should cohabitate with their wives while they were in a state of nida. So what did Jewish people do? In other words, they shut down all of the ritual baths, all of the mikvahs, all of the ritual baths. They locked them down. They put them under surveillance, so the women couldn't go anymore to the mikvah. So what did the men have to do? So the men had to separate from their wives. So everything that they tried to do, and everything that they decreed upon the Jewish people tried to wiggle out of it by, okay, you take it away from us, you took it away from us. But we're not going to disavow, we're not going to write publicly, or privately, that we are no longer connected with Almighty God. Now these Greeks, they admired the culture of the Jewish people. They admired the wisdom of the Jewish people, but they despised the faith that the Jewish people had in God. This was something that they couldn't accept. That God is a source of authority, that there's a God who obligates you to do this or don't do that. God is engaged, involved in your behavior. That's something that we do not accept. The beautiful wisdom that you have, the beautiful culture that we love, that we embrace, that we want, but just get rid of God. Get rid of the God elements from your life. So they enacted decrees aiming at uprooting the commandments which didn't make sense in logic. Purity and impurity. To go to a mikveh is something which doesn't have its roots in logic. You can't explain to someone exactly why you need to go to a mikveh, why a shower isn't good enough for you. No, you have to go to a mikveh. And the mikveh has to have these specifications. Why? Because you're ritually impure. What does that mean, ritually impure? I just came out of a shower. I'm not, no. You can't see it. It's not dirt. It's something of a spirit that you have to go into immerse in a mikveh, and that's going to help you get. I'll accept it, but it's not really something that you can understand with logic that, oh yeah, I get it. No. So the Jewish people kept finding creative ways and solutions to avoid transgressing on commandments between them and God without breaking the Greek law. So for every law that they decreed, Jews wiggled out of it in a certain way. And they made our lives very difficult. But then the Greeks came up with this nail in the coffin. And that was, they further decreed that before anyone marries a woman, the woman must first cohabitate with the ruler and only then be given to her husband. How do you get out of this one?
By not getting married.
But then there'll be no future. The Jews, that's it. There'll be no Jews anymore. Everything was going to be gone. There's no way to get around this one. This created a very, very big problem. A very, very big problem. How big was this problem? We just go to use our imagination a little bit over here. Take this. Pass it down. Sorry for those joining online. You can't follow inside, but we'll do a little bit of reading inside. You can follow inside. No.
2 pages.
2 pages each. 2 pages each.
There you go.
This practice went on for 3 years and 8 months. You imagine, for 3 years and 8 months, every Jewish girl, before she got married, was taken to the Greek ruler and violated. Every Jewish girl. 3 years and 8 months. This was torture. But it's almost like God created us in a certain way that we become comfortable even in very uncomfortable circumstances. The Jews were living in concentration camps, but as long as they were alive, they said, okay, we're here. This is this is the way it is. This is the way it is. What are you supposed to do? So Jews just accepted. For 3 years and 8 months, 3.5 years, Jews accepted that this is just the way of life. The new norm. It became the new norm. As disgusting as it was, it became the norm. Until something drastic happened. What was that? If you can follow along, what happened was they practiced this for 3 years and 8 months until the daughter of Yochanan, the high priest, was married. When they wanted to take her to the ruler, what did she do? Before they took her, she exposed her head and tore her clothes in front of the people. Judah and his brothers were outraged by her conduct, and they said, take her to be burned. In other words, what happened over here? She was, how did she protest?
Humiliating herself and being.
In front of everybody. In other words, not in front of the Greeks, in front of the Jews. She was the daughter of the high priest, and she stripped naked in front of everybody. Everyone says, Ashanda, an embarrassment to yourself, to your whole family, to all the family of the high priest. So what did she do? She said to him, I would rather be humiliated in front of my brothers and friends than be humiliated in the eyes of this impure person, that you wish to violate me by abandoning me to lie with him. This was a dagger in the heart of her brothers and of all the men present, because she stood up and she said, what's wrong with you people? How do you live and accept this to be the norm? How can it be normal for you that before I'm to be married, I'm going to be taken now to the Greek ruler for the night to be violated? And you don't say anything? You don't do anything? Silence. How do you respond to that? So what happened was, let's continue. When Judah and his colleagues heard this, they conspired together to kill the ruler. What did they do? They immediately dressed the young woman in royal clothing and made a canopy of myrtle from the Hashmonaim house to the house of the ruler. There were harpists, fiddlers, and singers, and they sang and danced until they came to the ruler's house. When the ruler heard this, he said to his ministers and his servants, look at these people, from the greatest of Israel and from the descendants of Aaron the priest, how happy they are to do my will. In other words, what did he think? 3.5+ years went by and no one said a word, so he assumed that everyone's coming now with a big celebration, that we're going to bring the daughter of the high priest to you for the night. He wouldn't think anything else. They are worthy of great honor. He ordered his ministers and servants to leave. Judah and his companions entered the ruler's house with his sister, and they cut off his head and plundered all of his belongings. They killed his ministers and servants, completely obliterated the Greeks, except for the main part of the kingdom. So what do you think happened? This is similar to what we read in last week's Parsha, when Dinah was kidnapped and raped by Shechem, but her 2 brothers did, but except this one was a little bit different. 3.5 years went by, and her brothers, because of her and because of what she did, her brothers realized what's wrong with us. We're going to do something about it. And they made this plan. They made as if they're bringing her to him. And when he let them in, they fought them and they killed all of them. So what do you think happened next? What happened next was this created a serious fear among the Jewish people. The Jewish people back in the city were trembling in fear for these Jewish men. A heavenly voice emerged and proclaimed, the young men who went to fight in Antioch won. In other words, everyone who didn't go, what were they thinking? What were they thinking? You imagine. You knew that a group of men went and you knew the plan. All you're thinking is, God, what's going to happen to these people over there when they get killed? And then they're going to come back at us and kill us after that. So a heavenly voice came in and said, they won. Oh, celebration. We could calm down. At least they're coming back home, these people. The fighters returned and closed the gates and did penance and engaged in Torah and charitable deeds. When the king of the Greeks heard that the Jewish people killed his representative, he gathered his entire nation and laid siege to Jerusalem, causing the Jewish people to be very afraid. So you see what happened over here was they went out. They killed one general, the general who was responsible for the most sick crimes against the Jewish girls. And they knew what's going to happen next, but they did it anyways. What was going to happen next was Antiochus, the real king, was going to find out that his general on the location was taken out, and his group of ministers were taken out. So he went and he laid siege to the entire Jerusalem. So the doors of the gates of Jerusalem are locked. No one is coming in and no one is coming out. And the Greek army surrounds Jerusalem. So what happens next? Continues the Medrash. There was a widow named Judith, Yehudis, who took her maidservant and went to the gates of Jerusalem. She said to the guards, "Let me go out. Perhaps God will do a miracle through me." She went before the king and he said to her, they opened the gates for her and she went out. She went before the king and she said to her, and he said to her, "What would you like?" And she said to him, "Master, I am a daughter of great Jewish people. My brothers are prophets. I heard them prophesying that tomorrow Jerusalem will fall into your hands." In other words, I don't want to be on the side of losers. I want to be on your team. You're going to be the ruler. Tomorrow Jerusalem's going to fall into your hands. When the king heard this, he rejoiced greatly. The king believed Judith and fell in love with her. And he said to her, "Would you like to marry me?" And she said to him, "My lord the king, I am not worthy of even one of your servants. But since your heart is so inclined, make a proclamation that throughout the camp that anyone who sees two women walking by the spring should not harm them, and I must go there to bathe and immerse myself." Now, this was her protection. In other words, she's going to be killed. So he tells the king, make a decree that no one will harm two women. Immediately the proclamation was sent out, and that is what she did. She went to bathe. The king followed by making a great feast, and the people drank and became inebriated. What do you think happened next?
It was a trick.
Of course. Of course. What happened was, Achakach, and afterwards, they went to their tents and the king went to sleep. Judith followed him and took his sword, cut off his head, and spread a sheet over it. She went with the king's head to the gates of Jerusalem and said, "Open the gates for me, for God has already done a miracle through me." They said to her, "It's not enough that you defiled yourself, but you're coming to us with a conspiracy." So immediately she showed them the head of the king, and as soon as they saw it, they opened the great gates and proclaimed all together, "Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad." When the Greeks heard this, they said, "Soon they're going to be coming for us." They went to the king and found him headless. A terror and fear fell upon them and they all fled. The Jewish people pursued them and killed many of them. So may the Almighty take revenge on our enemies speedily and grant us salvation, as it says, and a Redeemer shall come to Zion. This is the story of Chanukah that's not told all the time. This is the Medrash. But what do you see from this story? Who are the true victims of Chanukah? The women. The men figured a way how to get out of not doing what they weren't supposed to do. But the women had no choice. They were the real victims. And the miracle of Chanukah is produced via Yehudis, who went out on her own, putting her life on the line, and went and killed the general and produced his head, which turned the whole story on its head. They went from being in siege to running away and fleeing. So now we ask the question, are women obligated to light the Chanukah candles? And the answer is, of course they're obligated to light the Chanukah candles because the miracle came about through them. They are the miracle of Chanukah. You don't have Chanukah absent women. There's no Chanukah. So, of course, they played a central role in the story. And today we discovered the historical background. We have now a beautiful background to understanding why women have a special appreciation for Chanukah. Not only that, but it's brought down that when the Chanukah candles are lit, the women wouldn't work. They would behave differently. They took a very special interest and love to the Chanukah candles. Now that we have this background information, now let's understand one layer deeper. Let's peel back a little bit and understand the deeper reason for why the salvation of Chanukah came about specifically through a woman, and therefore why they're obligated in the mitzvah of Chanukah candles. Everybody with me? Yep.
Yes.
Ready for this? Excuse me. In order to get to understanding this, we have to understand the general question on the whole Chanukah. It's a question that gets at the core of Chanukah, really at the core of Chanukah, and that is, why did the Jewish people, what right did the Jewish people have to fight against the Greeks? We know the rule is that life, preserving life, is number one of primary importance in Judaism. We have many mitzvahs and many obligations, but life, to preserve life, takes precedence. There are three exceptions to the rule. What are the three exceptions to the rule?
Idolatry.
Good. In other words, generally speaking, the law is you have to transgress and preserve life. But in three instances, we say, don't transgress and give up your life. When are these? Number one is if someone tells you that you have to bow down, disavow Almighty God. You have to bow down to idols, worship idols. Someone says worship idols, you're not allowed to do it, you have to give up your life. Number two, if someone says to murder someone else. Either you kill that person or I kill you. You have no permission to take life from somebody else to save your own life. You have to give up your life. And number three is when it comes to forbidden sexual relations. You have to give up your life before engaging in illicit sexual relations. So that's the general rule of thumb. Now, what allowed the Jewish people to give up their life in the story of Chanukah, to fight with the Greeks? This is a question that really it gets to the core of Chanukah, because the whole miracle of Chanukah came about the Jews defeating the enemy. The Jews were a tiny fraction of people fighting against a mighty army. Why are you fighting with them? Why do you poke the eye of the bear? It's dangerous, and you should know it's coming to you if you did it. So you're going to complain that the bear attacked you and killed you? What are you thinking? Stay in your place and don't get aggressive, and everything will be fine. In other words, the chances of the Maccabees being successful and defeating the Greek army was basically zero. It wasn't like a 50-50 probability. It was zero. 99.999999%. An insignificant chance of a miracle you can't rely on. It was a 0% chance, not possible. It's like, imagine today, some gang in from Mexico, what do you call MS-13? MS-13 defeating the whole United States military. I mean, it's a joke. It's not. It doesn't have a chance in reality. They don't have the they don't have the people. They don't have the weapons. They don't have anything. So how do these Maccabees have a right to go up and start war against the superpower of the time? They were putting themselves in danger. They were putting their lives in danger. And the rule is you have to always preserve life. You're not allowed to put your life in danger.
Piercing.
So what were they thinking?
Period.
So in order to understand this, every rule has an exception to the rule. What's the exception to this rule? The exception to this rule is during a time of religious persecution. If it's going after your religion, if the non-Jews of their time are going after the Jewish religion, in other words, they're saying, we have no problem with you but we have a problem with Judaism, so then even the smallest mitzvah that they tell you, even a small mitzvah, you have to be ready to give up your life for. Because now the small mitzvah becomes, all of Judaism becomes into this mitzvah. So even if they tell you, we want you to I don't know, to violate the Shabbos. Well, I don't know, or any other mitzvah that normally would say, okay, my life's in danger, we violate the Shabbos. My life's in danger, you eat the non-kosher. But in such a circumstance, where they're coming at it from a religious persecution, that means that they are capturing all of my Judaism now and putting it into this behavior. And now I have to say, no. I'm a Jew. I don't do that. You can take me, but you're not going to ever get me to do this in this circumstances. So during that period of time, the Jewish people would have been considered to be under religious persecution. And since they were under religious persecution, so therefore they had an obligation now to defend their lives, even for a minor mitzvah, we'll call it. But even this explanation falls short. Why? Because there's a difference between defense and offense. The obligation to defend is one thing. That's very different than saying that you should go out and attack the non-Jews. You have to give up your life if they come to you and say you should violate this or give up your life, fine. So sometimes you have to give up your life. But if they're staying in their own homes, what gives you a right to go out and attack them and put your life in danger?
But if you know they're moving into position where they're going to attack.
It's fine, it's something else, but that's not the story. We're not talking about where there's a war and they're coming to kill you, so you have to try to defend yourself. No, they're talking about the story of Chanukah. They were living fine. They made decrees. You have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do that. In other words, give up on your Judaism. So if they came to one person and they say, you do this or give me your life, so that Jew has to give up his life. But what gives a right to the whole group of Maccabees to come and say, we're going to attack the non-Jews and try to start a war and kill them all, which is basically a suicide mission. Barring a miracle, it's a suicide mission. Logically, we're going to lose. Mathematically, we're going to lose. What gives them a right to do such a extreme move, putting their lives, all of their lives in danger? In America today, we say keep a low profile. What do Jews like to do? Jews like to keep a low profile. It's in our DNA, especially in America. Jews, it's part of the assimilation everywhere. The Jews want to assimilate, so the way you do it is you keep a low profile, and you sort of blend in, and nobody's going to notice you. No one's going to realize, no one's going to recognize the fact that you're Jewish, and that way everything will be good. It doesn't always work, and then our enemy shows us that you could try to live a low profile, and it doesn't matter, they come after you anyways. But the idea basically is if you could live a low profile and not antagonize, so then why shouldn't you? Why do you have to stick it in their face? Just to bother them, that you know it's going to elicit a reaction from them, which is going to be very negative? For what reason? But that's what the Jews did on Chanukah. We read the story. That's what they did. They attacked. Yeah, we were under religious persecution, but we decided to go out and form together a group of Maccabees, and we're going to go in and kill, we're going to fight this massive army. So perhaps we can suggest the following explanation. During the Chanukah period, there was a decree that targeted, as I mentioned before, the mikvahs, the laws of family purity, which is a matter of, we call it taharas, in Hebrew it's called taharas hamishpacha, the purification of the family. When a mother goes to the mikvah, it's not just for herself, but it's also for her offspring, that she's bringing in a state of purity into the world. And therefore, the state of purity for that generation and all future generations was now up in the air. Therefore, the Jewish people made no calculations about whether risking their lives was the right thing to do. Is it an obligation? Is it optional? They didn't take any of these considerations. They went and they embarked on a war beyond any rhyme or reason in order to protect and to guarantee the sanctity of the Jewish future. This was something that goes much deeper than just a mitzvah or preserving a few people in the community. This was talking about the future of the Jewish people being born in a state of purity and sanctity or not. And there are times, everybody likes to behave. Everyone, adults that are supposed to behave. Not like children. Children go to the playground and it's inevitable they're going to get into a fight. All right, there's always going to be a fight on the playground. There's always going to be a fight in school. There's going to always be fights. But if adults go to the playground and they come back fighting, that's not acceptable. You're supposed to be the adult, right? What happens when a child gets hit? So adults, they try to break it up. They be calm, cool, collected, break it up. That's all talking about when it's somebody else's kid. The moment somebody hits your kid, what happens? Then you go crazy. You start screaming, fighting, jumping. Yeah, you're an adult. What are you doing? Behave like an adult. What are you losing yourself for? It happened. One kid hit another kid. Even an adult hit your kid. You can go fight with them. That's what a child does. What happens? Logic is suspended. There's no logic. When you hit my child, it's not a 1 + 1 = 2, so now I'm going to go do this. It's instinctive. If you touch this, it's so valuable to me that I'm ready to put everything on the line for it. There's no question that has an answer over here. You messed with my greatest everything in life. And I'm going to come back at you with whatever I have. If I feel that you threaten this, there's no logic. Don't ask me any questions because I don't have any answers for you. Everything else, yes. If you ask me what's the rules, yeah, according to the rules of the book, I should not have done this. This is not what you're supposed to do. Parent whose child, God forbid, gets hit in the park by another adult should not respond by hitting the other adult. They shouldn't do that. Everyone will agree. When they give lessons on self-control, definitely everyone will sign up. True. But in the reality of life, if something is really so precious to you, this is what happens. It's a big thing in the world. You could say things about everything. If someone offends someone's mother, someone, all of a sudden, they said something nasty about my mother. Move on. Ignore them. Oh, you can't. Such a statement you can't ignore. You have to throw a punch. You can't ignore such a statement. You touch something so important to me. Like my mother. I'm going to defend that. I don't care what happens to me. This is what happened on Chanukah. The reaction of the Maccabees was when they realized what's at stake over here, the future of the Jewish people, the sanctity of the Jewish people, that you're going to close down the mikvahs, you're going to close down the ritual baths over here, and there will be no more state of tahara, there will be no more purity among the Jewish people. This was something we cannot allow. Are you going to tell me this rule and that rule and this obligation, and you're not allowed to, you're putting lives in danger? Talk to me tomorrow about that. We'll talk in court about that. Right now, it's irrelevant to me. The only thing that's in front of me is we have to get rid of this roadblock. We have to eliminate this decree. We have to abolish this decree. We have to bring back a state of purity and allow Jews to be pure and allow for a future generation to be born in a state of purity. There's answers for it also, but the answers are secondary to the main thing over here. It's called Lamayla mitam v'das, higher. It transcends intellect and understanding. It's something that runs at the core of who I am. Something that touches your core transcends logic and understanding. Who was the one to bring this wake-up call, to make this wake-up call to the Jewish people at the time?
Yehudas.
Who?
Yehudas. No, I don't know. Sorry.
This was the daughter of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. The day before her wedding. This is what she did sitting. This is what she was doing when she undressed. This was the alarm that she was setting off. Wake up, you people. Do you understand what's happening over here? There will be no future for the Jewish people like this. And as soon as they were awakened to it, right away, they went into action. Instantly. They came up with a plan. This is what we were going to do. And they're ready to defend it to the last drop of blood. What's the response from God for this? We win the war. And now comes to light the menorah in the temple. And we give a look, and you have to have pure olive oil. But we gave a look, and all we could find was impure olive oil. Right? We had oil. We had plenty of oil. The problem is that all the oil was impure. It didn't have the seal of the high priest on it. They were all defiled. Hashem made a miracle. What was the miracle? We found one small jug of pure olive oil that had the seal of the high priest on it still. It wasn't defiled. And we lit the menorah for one day. And that menorah, which should have only lasted for one day, lasted for 8 days and nights. That's the miracle of Chanukah. The first miracle is that we found the jug. And there's a miracle that the oil lasted 8 times longer, 7 times longer than it should have. So here's the question. Who needed the pure oil? The rule is, in Torah, the rule is that impurity, the laws of purity and impurity are either they're suspended or they're pushed away if the majority of Jews are impure. So if most of the Jews were impure, which in this case most of the Jews were all impure because everyone came from the battlefield, everybody was impure, ritually impure, so you can light with no problem. 100% kosher to light regular olive oil that's impure. Who needs pure olive oil? Why were they even looking for pure olive oil? And why did God make a miracle? They're going to find olive oil, and the olive oil is going to last for 8 days and nights. But based on everything that we said now, what's the answer? You tell me. God rewards a person commensurate with their behavior. Measure for a measure, what's called in the words of the Talmud, midah keneged midah, a measure for a measure. Since the Jewish people had self-sacrifice beyond the letter of the law, they didn't have to go and wage battle. Maybe they weren't even supposed to go and wage war, but they went and they did something which goes beyond the letter of the law. God recognizes this and God rewards them with the miracle of finding a jug of oil, which lasts for 8 days and nights. And this was also going beyond the letter of the law. Because strictly speaking, they would have been permitted to have impure olive oil. So when people go beyond their obligations and they make an effort to do something that they are not obligated to do, Hashem sees that. God derives pleasure from this. And in return, God rewards you in kind. God goes beyond what you deserve and rewards you in kind for your behavior. And this is an important lesson for every single one of us. When reflecting and analyzing the holiday and the miracles of Chanukah, we have to take an important lesson that sometimes we have to go beyond what's expected, beyond the call of duty. We do things that we're obligated to do, hopefully. We all fulfill our obligations. But then the question becomes, is that where it stops? So once I've checked the box that yes, I did this, now I'm no longer engaged? Or I keep interest. I offer more help. I go beyond. I act in a way that's super rational. I'm selfless, more than what anyone ever expected of me, and certainly more than what anyone can say is my obligation. And the merit of this, Hashem blesses us with abundance both in our spiritual affairs as well as in our material affairs. And we have not only what we need, that's like a minimum of what you need to live and survive, that's the obligation. But then you have even much more than that. You have abundance. Abundance is already beyond what's the obligation, beyond the letter of the law. So when we behave in such a fashion, Hashem responds in kind. This provides us with a beautiful insight into Chanukah, into the role of the women in the holiday of Chanukah, how the whole Chanukah miracle really revolves around the Jewish women at the time in a physical sense, and also till today when we light the menorah. We are reminded of the fact that the whole miracle of the oil was only a response to the behavior of the Jewish people at the time. The fact that we found the jug of oil which was pure and holy was because we made sure that we would insist on there being spiritual holiness for the Jewish future. There was a period of time when it was cut off. It's a sad, dark time in our history when it was cut off. It took someone like the daughter of the high priest to wake us up, to flip on the lights, to give you a little shake and recognize what's going on, what's wrong with you men.
Do we know her name?
I wondered that too, yeah.
What's that?
I wondered that too, yeah.
You wondered that too, so why didn't you say anything?
Waiting for Miriam to do it.
You waited. Okay.
Really, Rabbi?
Her name must have been Miriam.
Yeah.
Her name must have been Miriam. I'm sure we know her name. It's not written, recorded in this medrash. It doesn't say. I'm sure it says otherwise. I can't say. Off the top of my head, I don't know the name. But
Rabbi, isn't that Yehudis?
Yehudis was the second. The miracle came about through Yehudis. Yehudis was the one who went with her maidservant and crossed the walls of Jerusalem and went and killed the king over there. But this was before.
Before that.
This was how the whole story came about. When the first battle of the Maccabees, when the Maccabees first formed, was in response to the daughter of the high priest and what she did, because she insisted that she wouldn't go and spend the night with this general, with the local general, before she got married. That was the wake-up call for there. Okay, anyone have any questions? Hopefully this is informative and provided some good stuff for Chanukah.
Yeah, I have a question.
Go ahead.
But you said